Welcome back to the tenure titles and the temptation to jump trilogy. We talked about tenure already, and we also talk about when you know it's time to leave. So today we are talking about the exit and how to manage the exit. It is all about rewriting the story about your exit. Now, let me tell you, if you haven't already, subscribe and share because this has been a really great discussion and I really appreciate all the comments that you have shared with me so far. Now, I talked about the fact that in 2013, tenure, Uche tenure, I stayed, I stretched, and then I decided to leave because at the end of that 12 months, I felt super clear that I had been stretched, I had learned a lot more, and I was ready to move on. And so it was time for me to exit. And this is a conversation that every professional will face at some point in their career. Leaving, resigning, being let go, walking away, pushed out, quietly being shown the door, or even just proudly stepping into a new opportunity. Like everybody faces this at some point or the other in their career. So, whatever you choose to call it, it exists. And I think a lot of times we are not always prepared for the conversation. I think it's really important to own the narrative around how you choose to leave, whether you're resigning, whether you're chasing, whether you're going into a new opportunity, or even if there's been a redundancy or you've been fired or whatever. I think it's very important to understand a couple of things, and we're going to talk about this, right? Um, I think it's very important to understand, and I've had to learn this your job and your title are not your identity. And so let me say that again your job, your job title, they are not your identity. They're not who you are, right? They're a job and they're a job title, and those things are important, but they're not all of you. There's so many other aspects of you. And so a lot of times we're so wrapped up in I am the CEO of this, or I'm the vice president of that, I'm the director of this, and I work for so and so company, I work for so and so company. And when we lose that, even if we're losing it in a positive way, i.e., we're going from A to B, there's still a sense of loss. And that's why I'm talking about the fact that I do think it's important for us to own the narrative and rewrite the story of our exit. Now, not all exits are the same, obviously, right? And some are planned. So, like I talked about, I decided to leave this company after that 1 year of stretch. I went into a CEO role. But let me tell you something. Even though I've never talked about this before, please don't laugh at me. Um, so even though I was going into this new role, there's this. So I think it happens to people sometimes, right? Which is you have this belief almost as if, especially if you've been a very high performer, I think you've had this belief that the organization is going to die without you. It's so ridiculous. And so, even though I was moving on to this new job, I'm not going to lie, I spent a lot of time, and I wasn't, now let me just say, I was not the one doing the calling. But like people would call me to ask me how I was doing in a new job, how was I transitioning. And then, of course, we would always get to the conversation of my past company. And I used to take delight in hearing the stories about it. Either, yeah, that's what I said. I'm right. Who cares? You're not there anymore. And so there's something around when you've moved on, like it's very important for you to let go of the feelings around, I was so important to this company, because ultimately, if you're spending any time on that, it means you're not spending the time on the new job and the new role, and you're not giving that job and that new role 150. So it took me a couple of months, and then I was just like, you know what? I don't want to talk about that anymore. That's my past. That's my history. And so, it's important for you as you're exiting to watch out for the ego, right? And to watch out for the disappointment and the frustration and hurt that may come along, or just the fact that it's bittersweet. Like, you're happy to be going on to a new job, but you're bitter. To let go of those emotions so that you can focus on your future. Really important. I just wanted to say that because I thought it was, as I was thinking about this episode, I thought it was really interesting to mention that. But the point I wanted to make was that when I was leaving, I was really excited about where I was going. And the organization was also happy for me. They were like, great. And I remember my boss saying to me at the time, he said, not my boss, I think somebody that I was talking to in the organization before I left. He said to me, Uche, they're good leavers and they're bad leavers. You're a good leaver. And what did he mean by that? All he meant was that we were going to I was going to leave. I was going to move on to my new opportunity. The company recognized that I had done a good job while I was there. And while they couldn't retain me, they were proud of my next opportunity and they were happy to see me move on. And I think it's really important that when you are leaving, as much as you can, because this is not always the case, it's important to be a good leaver. A lot of times our industries are small, and especially when you go into senior leadership, it's a small group, right? And so you don't want to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the organization, and the organization doesn't want to leave a bad taste in your mouth, because you're to be an ambassador for the organization as well. And so when we talk about good leaving, we're talking about, the organization and the employee recognize that they've been of mutual benefit to each other, and that it's just the end of the season. And good leavers have the opportunity to come back. I've worked with people that have left an organization and they realized that they made a wrong decision for themselves and they decide to come back, you know? But I have a rule. Let me tell you my rule. Like, if you're leaving my organization, for example, and you lie to me about why you're leaving, I can't take you back. Like, you may have been the best employee, let's say you are the best employee in the world and you decide to leave because, of course, sometimes the organization is not as fast as your ambition. This happens, and that's fine. And so you say to me, Uche, my mother is really ill. I have to take her to another country for treatment, and I have to leave now. And this is why I'm leaving. And I'm leaving with my family. And I'm so sad to be leaving the organization. And I'm saying to you, oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear about your mother. Of course, I understand. I'm wishing you all the best of luck. Please let me know how the organization can support you. And then in 3 months' time, I see you working for our competition. You are a bad leaver, and we're not going to take you back because your lack of transparency, your need to lie, your need to lie on your mother. We don't like that. So I think important to be transparent. Like, you know what? I found another opportunity. You don't even always have to tell us where or who, but be transparent about, look, I found another opportunity. I think it's a great one for me and my family. I'm going to go. If it's competition, you have to say, because, I think that's important to do. But important to, again, make sure you're not leaving a bad taste in the mouth of the organization, remembering that our communities of leadership are really small, and so you don't want to burn bridges. I've had people who have left the organization or had to leave the organization. Maybe they're being pushed out and they're like, I'm about to burn this building down. Don't do that either. Again, good leader versus bad leader. Let's just make sure that you are leaving in a way that allows you to move on. So I just wanted to, again, just talk about the fact that people can leave in different ways, but you control the narrative of how you leave. So, you know, it's very important to make sure that you're leaving with clarity. So you're moving on to this next role, but you don't want to be the person like calling every 5 minutes, like, yeah, I told you, I saw what you guys did on LinkedIn. And that's just dumb. I told you not to do that. I was right. Don't be this person. Just be happy for yourself and move on. If you've been let go, if you've been kicked out, again, how do you negotiate your exit in such a way that you're able to move on and the organization is able to move on in such a way that you can be free to chase your next role or your plan for your next opportunity as well. So we said we're going to talk about rewriting the exit, and I like to talk about this thing that's called an exit bag, you know kind of like making sure that as you exit you don't have any heavy baggage with you, because what's really important is the clarity of your future and the things that you'll need to do going forward, right? So pack your exit bag. Let me just say this. Like, number one is, please, I've talked about this already. Leave behind bitterness. Leave behind an obsession of showing them. I'm going to show them. Yes, they left me. I'm going to show them. Don't do that. This is a waste of energy. Don't do that. And you're not showing anybody. Nobody in the organization is sitting there thinking, if only. No, they've moved on. Okay. And you don't need a final validation that may never come. This need to be told, like, you were the best thing that ever happened to this organization. You need to question why you need that. So leave that behind. Leave behind bitterness. Leave behind the need for validation from your former colleagues. Okay? What you do need to take with you are the lessons. So, of course, in that organization, you've been stretched. You were growing before you decided to leave or before you left, even if you were told to leave. So, what are those lessons? What's that stretch? Put down on paper, please, put down on paper the impact that you had in that organization, because you did. Nobody works at a company for 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, 1 year, whatever, without having any impact. No matter how little it is, put it down on paper. Remind yourself that you made a contribution to this organization. So the impact that you had, make sure you hold on to that. Because it's important for you to know that you can do the same and more in your next opportunity, in your next organization. You did that. You'll do it again, and you'll do even more. And the other thing is, please, I am begging you, do not burn the building down. Do not burn bridges. There are relationships within that organization that are worth holding on to. It may not feel that way today, but they will be. I was recently talking to someone who had been made redundant, right? And he was like, saying to me, like, I'm done with that organization. I'm done. The way they treated me was terrible. I don't want to ever deal with this organization again. And I was like, for real? Just like that? There is nobody in that entire organization that had a kind word for you, that showed you how to do something, that was your champion. No one in the entire organization. And then, they were like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Like, keep your relationships. Not everybody has been terrible. And there are going to be a couple of people that you want to make sure you stay in touch with, because they're part of your journey, they're part of your history, they're part of your legacy. Remember, I said you've had an impact of some sort. So you want to make sure that you hold on to those relationships. Don't burn the building down. Don't burn all bridges and say, I'm giving them all the smoke. Don't do that. Hold on to the things that are worth keeping. Now, One last thing I would like to say is that a lot of times, especially when you're not leaving of your own volition, right? So you're not resigning. Although if you're resigning and you feel like no one cares about it, that hurts. But if you've been made redundant or if you've been fired, it can feel terrible. It can feel really terrible. You deal with the fact that your ego is bruised. Okay. So, as I told you, even and I was leaving in a good way, I was still like, oh, what's going on over there? You know, so you don't want to be that person. You want to take the ego out of it. So, and if you've resigned and everyone was like, well, thank God, you're going to feel the bruise of your ego. If you've been let go of in a redundancy, you're going to feel terrible. And if you've been fired, you'll feel terrible as well. So the ego bruising. You're going to maybe feel ashamed because, again, especially if you're a person whose identity is closely tied to the company and to the title, like I am Uche Fordley, I am CEO of XXX. And this is how you always introduce yourself because that's the first thing that you think is most important about who you are. You're going to definitely feel a bit of shame and you're going to struggle with the identity shift. What happens when we strip away the title and we strip away the company? What are you left with? A lot. But those are things that take time to process, because you've lost something. Something has been lost. So, that first time you go out and someone says to you, what do you do for a living? And you can't say, I'm vice president, blah, 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 of this company. You may struggle for words. And I think it's, again, really important to be very clear about what is my story now that I've left. You might be saying to yourself, look, they had a restructuring and unfortunately I was affected, but, I'm taking a few months and after that I'll, start to explore what next, or you know what? I had to leave because I really had a difficult time with some of the changes in the organization. Just wasn't for me anymore. And I'm going to take a few months to figure out what next. Whatever that answer is, or even I've seen this happen before, by the way. You've worked for a big multinational. Now you've left, you're now working for, a really small firm or a small business. And you feel that, oh my goodness, have I made the right decision? So there's a bit of the ego and a bit of the shame where you're like, oh, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I used to be CEO of big company, but now I'm here. Get over that, So it does take time to process these changes, the shifts in your identity, the fact that your ego has been bruised, and the fact that you may feel a bit of shame. And that's okay. Take your time. Take your time to do that, but don't stay in it. Because as I said to you earlier, your job, your title, your company, it's just a tiny piece of who you are and what you contribute to the world. So resist the need to exaggerate, just keep it practical, as I gave you some good examples. Practice your new introduction. Who are you today? Who are you now? And by the way, hold on to that because that is who you are, right? When we strip away the job, the title, that's you, that's your very essence. So practice that new introduction. Say it loud. Own it. You're not the first person who has changed jobs, lost jobs, been fired, nor will you be the last. And you're not alone. So please own it. Don't be ashamed. People remember how you leave. So, you know what? As the kids say, stay classy. Don't burn the building down. Don't burn bridges. You want people to recommend you. You want people to remember you positively. You want people to say, yeah, unfortunately they had to leave, but they were really good at their job. They were a good employee. They were a good colleague. Please, please, please don't do this. And I know we've all done it once in a while, but let go of the fantasy that the organization will collapse without you. They're not. And even if they do, it's not your business because you've moved on and you're no longer there. So you don't care about what's happening with that company any longer. Your focus is on yourself and your future. Don't care about that. Don't. And finally, and I think this is the most important thing I'll say to you is don't confuse exiting with failure. Whatever the reason is, like, even if you decide to leave emotionally because you didn't get a promotion, don't see that as failure. You might have not left for the right reasons, but don't see it as failure. Exiting is not failure. Exiting is sometimes what needs to happen for you to pursue your next chapter. That's okay. And again, it takes time to process, but please accept that. So for me, exit's about moving forward. And it's really important that you shape the narrative about your moving forward. So that's the story. The story is not the exit. The story is the fact that you are moving forward. And so, what's the story that you want to tell about moving forward? And please make sure, remember I talked about it. Pack your exit bag wisely. And as always, don't let the smile fool you. Thank you so much for listening to this trilogy, tenure, titles, and the temptation to jump. Today we were talking about rewriting your exit. If this is really interesting to you, please don't forget to subscribe. And more importantly, don't forget to share with someone who is having this exact same conversation. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Thank you for listening to the Don't Let the Smile Fool You podcast. I hope you found it really, really interesting. But more importantly, I hope you're still smiling. See you soon.